In many of my House of the Dragon videos, I've spoken about the silhouette of the costumes and the lack of correct foundation garments and their importance. Before the next episode airs, I thought I'd take this opportunity to address it in a standalone video. For starters, this is by no means an issue with just House of the Dragon. It's a common problem in other fantasy and historical dramas, but for this video, I'm speaking about HBO's House of the Dragon. I also want to mention, as I often do, that I'm not an historian. My background is in costume and costume design, so it's through this lens that I'm doing this video. And there will be some spoilers for House of the Dragon. Now let's break this down a bit. The world of House of the Dragon is in the same universe as Game of Thrones, but it's set 200 years in the past. With that, we already have a lot of information, and we know what the people in Westeros were before the bloody Targaryen civil war that came to be known as the Dance of the Dragons. In the court of the Red Keep in Game of Thrones, Queen Cersei Lannister set the styles worn by the other noble women. This was a thread that carried through all 8 seasons. Beginning in Season 1, Cersei wears kimono-style gowns, one of 2 styles that she wears, that are copied by the other noble women, most notably Sansa Stark. In Season 1, Sansa admires the fashions of the court and desperately wants to replicate them, even if it means eschewing the clothing styles of her own house. Under their paper silk gowns, Cersei and Sansa wear stays, or a pair of bodies, a fully boned lace bodice worn on the top portion of the body. They also wear 1 or 2 petticoats that give volume to the skirts of their gowns. There are some scenes such as Sansa being thrown down in the throne room by Sir Meryn Trant and the attempted rape of Sansa in Flea Bottom, where we get a glimpse at her stays, petticoats, and hosiery. There's also another scene where Sansa is being dressed by Shae with a great shot of her stays, and another of Cersei's stays when Jaime visits her room in Season 1. I will add here that no one is wearing a shift or chemise under their stays, which was a misstep by the Game of Thrones costume team. The shift is always the first layer under all foundation garments because it can be laundered, it keeps the stays clean, which aren't exposed to the dirt and oil of the skin, and it prevents any kind of chafing of the skin by the stays. I have called that out in many other videos because you don't want to have stays on bare skin. So why is this important? It's bolder and imposing compared to the more drape-like quality of the servants. It's also a power dynamic and creates a more extreme silhouette compared to that of the natural body. And with the correct foundation garments, the waist is nipped in, their busts lifted, and the skirts have a more bell-shaped silhouette that sachets as they make their entrances. Roz at one point is even seen in the style of gown, showing her rising ambitions as Littlefinger's right-hand woman. In a flashback scene, a young Cersei is dressed in a similar silhouette. Cersei even mocks Marjorie Tyrell of Highgarden for her skimpy dresses because it is so foreign to her, and by using her sexuality, it's also threatening to Cersei to see her dressed in so little clothing. But while Marjorie doesn't wear stays from what I can tell, there's too little clothing on top, she and her grandmother Olenna wear petticoats under their skirts. To give some context to show that it's still in universe, showrunner Ryan Condal said in the New York Times interview, "There's 172 years of history that happened between these 2 series. Much had to be the same because it's still Game of Thrones, it's still the same universe. But things also have to be different to communicate this massive passage of time. So there were the opposing forces that we were always weighing." In House of the Dragon, while the armors and many of the men's long-line doublets are pretty much in keeping with Game of Thrones costumes, despite it being a much earlier time, a lot of the costumes, including Otto Hightower and the noble women, take inspiration from the Tudor and Elizabethan era. This is when the silhouettes of the court were exaggerated for both men and women, as we see in paintings from the period. Queen Elizabeth I and her father, King Henry VIII, were both fashionistas of their time and had some of the most ridiculous silhouettes. It gets more extreme as we get into the 17th and 18th centuries with court mantuas, side hoops, or panniers worn under the gown. Women could barely pass through the door because their gowns were so wide. So back to the House of the Dragon when the Targaryen Dynasty is at the height of their power and decadence. Why do the foundation garments like stays and farthingales, a hoop petticoat, matter? The issue for me is that when the design team chose to go with a silhouette inspired by the Tudor and Elizabethan eras without the correct foundation garments, it all starts to look very droopy and ill-fitting and moving into Ren Fair territory. It's kind of like framing a house. If you don't have a solid foundation and understructure before adding all of the walls and the roof, the whole thing will start to sink and sag. So this is what I'm seeing here, and you might have noticed too. Lots of ill-fitting costumes with dents and bumps and creases. As we see in the show, we're relying on the natural silhouettes of the actors. This is not to body shame them, but when designing a costume, the actor's shape should not necessarily inform the costume. It should be the other way around. This has to be decided well before the costumes are even made because the cutter has to draft a pattern based upon it fitting over the underpinnings. So, for instance, it appears that the strapless bra worn by Millie Alcock, who plays young Rhaenyra, under her yellow gold gown is an afterthought. In modern terms, it's not even the correct choice for an undergarment because a strapless bra provides all of the lift from the band without the aid of the straps, and it starts to slide down the body with gravity. So even if they did a fitting with the strapless bra, throughout the day or days of shooting, the bra will settle and create that tightness of the dress around the bust and dents underneath because the bust should have been sitting higher. At the very least, the wardrobe team should have gone with a long line bra like they use in the bridal industry, which would have supported her better and for longer. And while Emily Carey, who plays young Allison, does wear a chemise under her pale blue silk gown, the gown looks too tight across the bust, creating that pancake look. This often happens with a compression or sports bra. Now, some of you have already mentioned in the comments that the ill fit on Rhaenyra might be intentional in the same way that Sansa wore loose-fitting dresses in the earlier part of Season 1, or even Marjorie Tyrell, who experimented with her burrito dress in Season 2. I will say that I've looked ahead to the latter part of the season of House of the Dragon, and in some cases, the costume fit gets worse. But costumeco, you might opine, you forget that it's a fantasy drama and not a medieval or Renaissance reproduction. Okay, but let me put this out for you to ponder. The world of Westeros is a patriarchy. The social norms and traditions of their society are likely abhorrent to us as a modern Western culture. You cannot have all of the misogyny that goes along with a patriarchal society without also having underpinnings that serve as a metaphor for the control of women. Also, the Targaryen nobles are the Westerosi version of rock stars, so a certain amount of pageantry is expected. In our day and age, the British royals command a huge amount of attention with swaths of the public showing up in London anytime there is a wedding or celebration of some kind just to catch a glimpse of the royals. At the tourney, for instance, the Targaryen family is sitting in the royal box of the Colosseum while the rest of the attendees are in the stands. What better way to have the royal Targaryens more visible than to have their clothing be extreme? Tongues will wag about what the noblemen and noblewomen wore. Added to this, from a storytelling perspective, during a time of opulence, the Targaryen Dynasty should be dressed to the extremes to show their wealth and power. Aside from beautiful fabrics and jewels, which are on full display, this can be achieved by the width and height of their costumes. The skirts of the gowns should be wider, their sleeves bigger, and their collars that much taller and rigid, like we see in many of the Renaissance paintings of nobility. Even on the men, they should show their gravitas by having their surcoats padded and heavily pleated and their collars oversized. In turn, larger volumes of fabric are needed, which would make their clothing all the more decadent and cost-prohibitive for the lower born. And historically speaking, sumptuary laws were instituted as a way for the nobility to prevent commoners from imitating the appearance of aristocrats. As we go along, I will likely have more to say on this subject, but for now, please leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I read all of them and I will respond back when possible. Hey, and we've got a live stream on Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. EST that I hope you can join us for. If you want to check out more House of the Dragon content, I have a full playlist, so I'll leave a link for that in the description below. Thank you for spending time with me. I'll see you in the next video.
Freedom! So fresh, so new. Freedom! It's all for you. All for you. Freedom! Keep your ear to the ground. Talking about freedom! It's the best show in town. Best show in town. Freedom!